nothing more came.
It's a habit, I think. It's
Yeah,
I'm perfect. You get a return message?
yeah.
No, I know it doesn't.
I have to wear these inside glasses with sunglasses. For about 3 to 4 weeks. And I'm like, that's weird. I've spent money on this. I don't want to.
Right.
I want to start doing it.
That's right.
I mean, let's face it. So, I got a new look for it. That's all. I got a new look for a moment. That's all. So, but I can't complain. I was very pleased with it.
Yeah.
So, and I've been through, as you know, the attractive. I just can't wait to it was a 2 o'clock surgery.
All right, good morning, everybody. It is time for us to get started on our Equipping Hour session for today. We're starting a new study today, and I'm excited about this. We've been thinking about doing this for quite a while, and glad it's finally here. It's going to take us a while. At the moment, I think I have this plotted out for 10 weeks. We'll see. Things like this can be an accordion. It can expand or it can contract, just depending on how much interest there is. We want to move nice and slow through this study, and I'm really looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have around this. And I hope that that you'll come with ready to interact and talk through these things, because I'm going to present quite a few ideas and things, and I hope that you're ready to interact and ask questions and so forth. So one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this study, and I'm going to use this term throughout, so I'll define it probably multiple times, as I know that people are not necessarily here every week. When we talk about the study of anthropology, and particularly biblical and or theological anthropology, anthropology refers to the study of man, all right? Anthropos is the Greek word for man, person, mankind, really. Properly speaking. And so an ology is a study of. So when you study theology, you're studying God. Theos, God, ology. When you're studying biology, bios, life, ology, study of. So you get the point. So anthropology then is the study of man, the study of mankind. Studying anthropology isn't unique to Christians. Pretty much if any of you went to a college somewhere, you probably had an anthropology class or an anthropology department, something like that, at your college. That's pretty normal for people to be talking about this. And a lot of times, how many of us had social studies growing up in school? Yeah. Do we still call it that? I think what's it called now? Do we know? Like history, humanities, maybe something like that. So a lot of us grew up with social studies. Social studies, interesting how we've kind of changed the terms on that. We'll talk about why some of this terminology kind of comes and goes and changes with the times. It's an interesting study. So social studies it's really basic anthropology. It's how humans interact in community. And here's the thing. We are completely and utterly unique amongst God's creation. And that's really the main point. If you get nothing else out of this morning in particular, that's what we want to talk about. What makes us unique? What is it? Why do we ask the questions that we ask? So the questions we have to ask, there's something embedded and wired into human DNA that forces us to ask questions about meaning, about purpose, about identity. And this is unique amongst the rest of God's creatures, and we'll talk about why that is. Psalm 8:4 frames the question well. We'll go back to the psalm multiple times. What is man that you're mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? The context of this psalm is the psalmist David is considering, when I look at the heavens, when I look at the stars and the sun and the moon that you've set in place by your little finger, you just kind of placed them there. I know some of us, you enjoy, the outdoors. You enjoy seeing the stars, telescopes. Many of us were watching the Artemis mission and space launches and these sorts of things. It's interesting because it's so big and vast and great and awesome. And the psalmist says, God just kind of, with the tip of his finger, just placed all these things out there. The galaxies. We don't even know what's out there. It's amazing. And then, if you take that, the bigness, the greatness, and yet God crowned man with dignity and honor and put him in charge of his creation here on earth. It's an amazing thing. And so it forces us to ask this question, what is man that you're mindful of him? And I think that should be our same question. Part of the underlying foundation for why we want to do this class, I have made the case, and I'll continue to make the case, I think the most pressing issue of our day is defining what a human is, all right? It's defining what a human is. That's why we're so uncomfortable with things like AI, which we'll get into a little bit later. We have outsourced a creative act, and that's why it sort of makes us uncomfortable. When it starts sounding a little bit like us, it kind of spooks us out a little bit, right? And so we are unique amongst God's creation, and we have to maintain that uniqueness. I love this quote. This is from Jürgen Moltmann. He says, "A cow is always simply a cow. It does not ask, what is a cow? Who am I? Only man asks such questions, and indeed clearly has to ask them about himself and his being. This is his question. His question follows him in hundreds of forms." I just love that quote. A cow is simply a cow. Our pet cat that torments us in our little house. It's not asking, who am I? What am I? It's just like, hey, can you give me some turkey? That's their existence. Can you scratch my head while I take a nap? That's all it wants. Humans are different. We're different because we're designed with something about us is different. And so what I want to do is break this down. This will be 2 weeks. So I want to talk about man as human. What does it mean to be human? What are the constituent parts of humanity? How do we understand that both in a social way and then importantly in a theological way? We'll look at man as embodied. What are these bodies? Are they good? Are they bad? Should we even think in those terms, in terms of good and bad? What do we do when our bodies break? How does that change us? Does that alter identity in some way? Does it change our value? How do we think through that? Man is image bearer. We'll save that for next week. Most of that all of this really relates to what it means to be an image bearer, right? So that's like the central thing is man is created in God's image, and everything else sort of falls out of that. But we'll take some specific time to look at that. And then lastly, we'll see man as a responsible agent. So these last two will be next week. As I said, I think this is the question of our day. I think it's what everybody's wrestling with. I think it is just central to understanding in our day and age. So that's why we want to take a little bit of time and go through this. So let's look first at the text of Scripture, the most important central text from Genesis. The uniqueness of man in the creation narrative. Man is the Adam, Ha-Adam. Adam means man, all right? Also is a name, for us. But it means man, literally means man. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. I want to read a few verses, but I want to show you something interesting here in the narrative. There's a lot that could be said about the creation event. I want to start reading in verse 20. All right, this is Genesis 1, and I'm going to start in verse 20. We're picking up in the middle of the story. It's the days of creation. But I want you to watch the uniqueness of the creation of humans. So verse 20, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So we have God has created a place for the birds to fly, the heavens, created the water for them to swim. And he says, let the waters swarm with living creatures, let the birds fly in the expanse of the heavens. Okay, so, hey, birds, fish, creatures, go. You're up. And they go. Verse 21, "So God created the great sea creatures, the marine life, and every living creature that moves." All right, so that's a very inclusive statement. with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. All right? And he blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. So we have the first 4 days of creation. God's creating this wonderful place. And then the last 3 days of creation, he's populating this place. He gives the ruler of the sun and the moon to rule God's night and day. In day 4, day 5, he begins to populate it. And then we come to this day, verse 24. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Okay. All right, so God just says, hey, birds, boom, go. Fish, go. Living creatures, go. But then, notice what happens. It's like you're kind of clicking along in this narrative, and then it's like you go into slow motion. And he takes his time to explain what happens next. Notice, verse 26, then God said, let us make man, Adam, in our image, after our likeness. He didn't say that about the cows and the other fish of the sea or the birds of the air. And let them have dominion, responsibility, over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heaven and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Okay, very important. Man is given, there's this slowing down of the narration of the creation account. And then there's this creation of persons, humans, with different type of explanation and said to be created in the image of God. And they're given responsibility, unlike the other animals. All right, verse 27. Then we get this famous verses. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Okay, well, that's going to be our theme verse for this study. And notice what else happens. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. He'd also told the rest of the animals to be fruitful and multiply. And fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. Okay? So he's built this incredible, abundant place for humans. It's going to sustain them. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the ground, everything that has a breath of life, I have given you every plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So we get this, a different kind of thing that's happening, a different kind of explanation. So the Bible's perspective then is you have God and everything else. Okay, you could draw a line that way. You could do this the second way. You could say there's man and everything else underneath God. All right, so God, man, everything else belongs underneath that line. And so there's a uniqueness here. Now, we have the creation account in day 1, or in Genesis 1. So it's sort of the way I've described it. It's like the play-by-play guy is in Genesis 1, telling you on day 1, day 2, day 3, this is what happened. Chapter 2 comes back, and it gives us some flavor or insight. It's sort of the color commentary on what just happened. And in that, he says this, then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. So there's a uniqueness about the way that man is created. He's taken the materials are taken of the earth, and he breathes the breath of life into him. No other animal is said to be created in that sort of way. So there's a uniqueness that's being looked at here. Now, one of the questions that we'll wrestle through as we do this study, when we look around culturally, why are we in the situation that we're in? Why are we in a place where it's driven largely by sort of utilitarian values, might makes right, sort of thinking? Why is that? And my argument is because we've lost the idea of creation and we've lost the dignity of humans and people. So an alternate story is evolution and materialism. So think about this. What's a human if there is no God? And I don't want to just treat this rhetorically. I actually want to see what you say. What makes humans different from the rest of the animal kingdom? What's left to give meaning and value to life? Okay, here's what I want you to do. This is a difficult task for some of us, I know. I want you to take off your Christian hat completely. All right, you are no longer a theist. You're no longer a God person, okay? For the purpose of this exercise, just for a minute, we're going to go back to being Christians in just a minute. Take off that hat, that way of thinking. How do you answer these questions? Give it your best shot. What makes humans different from the rest of the animal kingdom? What would you say? How do you answer?
We have the ability to reason.
Reasoning ability, good. Rationality, excellent. These are all very important. Yeah.
We're just farther along in the chain of evolution.
More developed, right? Yeah, we're farther down the line. So rationality, we're relational beings in a unique sense. I think everybody recognizes we're relational in a unique sense. I mean, we see like other animals kind of flocking together, but in a unique way, we're farther down the evolutionary chain. Yep.
We create things.
We create. Okay, good. Yep. We have a creative ability. I've joked about this before. If you just took 1,000 acres, let's say, up in the middle of Georgia, all right, we'll just pick a spot, and you put, let's say, 200 deer in this 1,000 acres, and assuming all things are fine and good, and you leave, and you come back in 50 years from now, what's the land going to look like? Not all that different, right? I mean, they're going to eat down some things, and they're going to multiply, and they're going to do their thing. What if you took 200 humans and plopped them down in 1,000 acres? If they live and they don't kill each other, you come back in 50 years, what's that territory going to look like?
Strip mall.
Exactly. And there's going to be a mattress store. Why do we need so many mattress stores? A Chinese buffet. There's going to be all these things that just keep popping up everywhere. I like coffee, but my goodness, how many coffee shops do we need? The point is, we're created with a unique capacity, and our relationship to the earth is created in a kind of unique, right, from the rest of the animals. So yeah, creative ability. I think that's a real thing that distances us. Okay, so we've talked about the rational, we've talked about the relational, we've talked about the creative. Yep. Dominant.
Have more power.
Yeah. Mostly because of our developed
Cognitive function.
cognitive ability, right? Okay, so let's keep track here. We've talked about relational. We've talked about rational ability. Talked about cognitive ability. What else have we talked about? Moral. Yeah. Okay. So moral. That's an interesting one.
That would be interesting. I would say more like empathy, probably from our cognitive ability, which then leads to something like morality.
Yeah.
That's not exactly morality.
Yes. Yes. And I would tuck that underneath cognitive ability, maybe as a subset. Now, here's my question. What happens if an individual doesn't have those? All right? Let's say there's somebody that's born with severe cognitive impairment. They are in a vegetative state. They're on a feeding tube. Did they have value? They don't have creative ability. They don't have rational, capability. They don't have the cognitive ability that we've been talking about. They can't create things. Did they have value? Yeah.
In this scenario where we take off our Christian hat, they have no value.
I know. And that's it. They don't. But here's my thing. Secularists can't say it, and they won't say it. Why? They can't complete their worldview.
Because
It's a slippery slope.
it's immoral, and they know it, and they know that it's immoral.
That's what I'm getting at. There's something deeply embedded in the human psyche. There's a code that's deeply embedded, and you just can't shake it. You just can't shake it. It doesn't matter how much, you can go down the Marxism path, or the Pol Pot, or any of these guys, sort of thinkers. that, humans are just widgets. We're just units. And so when you become a useless eater, that was actual wording of some of the German scientists in the 40s. When you become a useless eater, you're worth nothing but to be destroyed. You're a drain on resources. Malthusian. Overpopulation is our biggest problem. It's Thomas Malthus. That was kind of his thing, which is proven to not be true, of course. But what do you do with that? And most of the world stands in horror when people actually finish their worldview and say, well, there is no significance, there is no importance. We can't reconcile that. So what's left to give meaning and value to life? And I think there's a real struggle. And I think this is part of why there's such a struggle right now to figure out what's a person, who are we, how do we reconcile this?
But Alan, don't you have situational, I can't say the word, efficacy? And I'm trying
What
to
was the word?
Efficacy, but no, but I mean, situationally, my morals change because I got this fact, and therefore I think the Jews are bad, so I'm gonna kill the Jews. My circumstance changes when I have no founding space, no dot that says this is what I believe, this is my foundation. Then what happens? Then whatever I feel about today is how I will act.
Yeah.
Whether I will preserve you or take you, kill you, enslave you. It's situational ethics.
Yeah.
You have to have objective truth, and you can't have objective truth without a higher power.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's your own feelings and opinions, and then people will say,
Right.
well, we decided as a society, like, well, other societies have decided that the opposite of what you said. So.
Right.
In secular view, man is the power.
They are, and it's
In secular view.
not even a democratic process, really. It's a power play.
Yeah.
Might makes right, kind of thing. So this is a guy that many of you are familiar with. Some of you grew up watching those little videos with Mr. Carl Sagan. He said this: the nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. We humans, this is the one. All right, so two different quotes. One talks about us, another word that I'm going to probably use multiple times is the word ontology. When I say ontology, I mean the essence of our being, so an ontological existence, what we are. So this speaks to ontology. What are we? All right, what is a human? I'm a person standing here. You can see me, but what is it? How do we identify that? Sagan would say that basically you are a cosmic accident that just happened to come together in the way that you did. All right, you just kind of happen to be that way, and really freedom of will isn't actually possible, because the freedom of will, you can't think otherwise right now, because right now they're thinking. Imagine yourself like a computer. All right, you're just processing data. All right, you're just processing data. You're hearing words I'm saying, you're thinking thoughts right now, but the only reason you're thinking those thoughts is because of the data that you're getting. Like a computer, you can't do otherwise because you're just a computer. And so your particular wiring, to borrow the phrase, is just the constituent parts of you, just the components of you. And so you're just star stuff, and you can't do any different. Just like your dog can't do any different or anything else. So this one speaks to what we are, ontology. This one speaks to meaning and purpose. Sagan said this: we humans are like a newborn baby left on a doorstep with no note explaining who it is. What a sad way to live. What a sad way to live. So this is sort of the in conclusion of a worldview that just says, like, complete materialism, completely materialistic worldview. This is where it ends. You can't have meaning and purpose. And so what's left then? Define it yourself. It's choose your own adventure. What gives meaning and purpose? What you think gives meaning and purpose. That's what gives you meaning and purpose. And we've disconnected that from community and all these other ideas. So what if man is just another beast of the field? What happens then? Francis Schaeffer said it this way. This is he wrote a book. It was published in 1979 with Everett Cooper. And he was a medical guy. He ended up being Surgeon General of the U.S. Following that. He was friends with Schaeffer. This came out in '79. It was Whatever Happened to the Human Race. And they're taking on a few things that were going on in their day, which are not different from our day. We use slightly different vocabulary, but it's the same thing. Schaeffer said, "If man is not made in the image of God, nothing then stands in the way of inhumanity." Think about that. There is no good reason why mankind should be perceived as special. Human life is cheapened. We can see this in many of the major issues being debated in our society today. Abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, the increase of child abuse and violence of all kinds, pornography, the routine torture of political prisoners in many parts of the world, the crime explosion, and the random violence which surrounds us. So he says, if you remove God and the concept of the image of God, this is what you get. And we'll talk in another time just about this sort of grand arch of the Christian message and how really Christianity has helped to infuse the world with the values that it has now, even if it doesn't know that that's where they came from. Tom Holland wrote a big book, history book called Dominion. He's not a Christian, but he wrote about the cultural influence of Christianity, which is different from believing the gospel, just to be clear, but interesting all the same from a worldview kind of exercise. So Schaeffer saw this coming. He was living in it, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it really hasn't changed. So this is what we're looking at. Owen Strachan, in his book Reenchanting Humanity, I enjoyed that book. He says, thus, the common origin between beast and man is not a gaseous pool of Precambrian cosmos or any form of interspecies physical evolution. All things proceed from and inhere in God. His word rules the day. More than this, it makes the day. I love that quote. It doesn't just rule the day, it actually makes the day. And he goes on, although the logical basis for real affection seems suspect, many evolutionists live life as if it does have meaning and purpose. I think that's a really good insight as well. C.S. Lewis said something very similar. I'll give you this and then we'll pause. The Christian and the materialist hold different beliefs about the universe. They can't both be right. The one who is wrong will act in a way which simply does not fit the real universe. I love that. And that's my argument, is the materialist is actually not living in a way and not able to live in a way that's either, one, fits the real universe, or two, is consistent with their view. Because taken to its logical conclusion, they don't actually act like what they say they believe. So that's my argument there. So humans are unique and different because we're created in the image of God. We haven't defined that necessarily right now, but we're just starting at the beginning and saying that we are unique and different, and that's why we're doing this study. All right, thoughts on that before we move along. What is it? What are the parts of us? That's what we want to get into next. So any other thoughts on that?
What's the question?
What's that?
What's the question?
I was just asking for any feedback or thoughts on what we've covered so far as man's uniqueness. That's the main thing I want to drive at right now. Yep. Yeah, right.
Where you were sort of driving the point at the end about some of the inconsistency, particularly in that quote that Lewis, it's ironic to me that the non-Christian would accuse us of being inconsistent, illogical,
Right.
and yet it looks like, from this perspective, they're the ones that are the more illogical.
I think it is. And that's where some of these guys, Richard Dawkins, a lot of you are familiar with Richard Dawkins. He's probably the most famous atheist alive today. Wrote a massive book called The God Delusion. Dawkins is on record recently calling himself a cultural Christian. And he said he's kind of scared that if you eliminate Christianity, what's going to come next? He's very much on record, and he's speaking particularly about Islam. He's very nervous that Islam and the worldview of Islam is gonna become more rampant, and so he's looking at that and going, maybe I don't want to kill Christianity. Maybe that wasn't so bad after all. It's just really interesting. But I think he's like Exhibit A, and you can't be consistent, I don't think, with this. Yeah, and that's what when the Bible says, like in Psalm 14, or was it the parallel Psalm 50, I think, the fool says in his heart that there is no God. I don't think he's talking necessarily about atheists. It could apply. What he's talking about is people that act as if there is no God. God's not going to see. God doesn't know. He's not watching. And so it's people that act as if there is no God. There's no accountability at that part. Okay, let's move along then. So what is it that makes up man? What are what's sometimes called the constituent parts of man? I want to introduce you to something here that's probably not something you've been thinking about this week, and I completely understand that. But I want you to know the conversation is going on out there, and if you want to drill down on this, we can, or we can just move along and you can say, that was fun, let's move along. Okay, so there's kind of two basic understandings and views of what makes up a person, okay? There are people who call themselves trichotomist and people who call themselves dichotomist. Here's what those mean. Trichotomy says that man is made up of 3 parts, all right? So what are the ingredients of a human? 3 parts. There's a body, there's a soul, and there's a spirit, okay? The soul and the spirit are separated. Dichotomist, which I lean more this direction, says man is made up of 2 parts, a body and a soul spirit. There's reasons why people argue this. What are we? What are we? And I think one of the questions we have to wrestle with as we think through this is what makes us different from animals, right? We're asking that question. If you have how many of you have dogs? Yeah, that's not nearly as many as I thought. Cats, yeah, we're infected with cats at our house as well. So they all have, you've had pets, I'm sure, at some point in your life. They all have their own personalities, right? They all have their own things that you do, and they're moderately predictable, most of them. You know that they're going to come, and they have a spot they like to sit, or, a thing they like to do, or a thing they like to eat, or whatever. There's an immaterial part of them, right? They're not all the same. So there's a material part, and there's an immaterial part. Okay. All right, so there's an animal. It has a material and immaterial part. There's a human. It has a material and immaterial part. What's the difference? What are we saying, about those differences? And that's one of the things that trichotomy is trying to wrestle with. What does that mean? And how should we think of that? I don't think we need to, I think the emphasis ought to be on this, what's been called holistic dualism, and another phrase that gets used sometimes is the psychosomatic union. Psyche, psychic, you hear that word? It means the soul, the person, the immaterial. Somatic, somos, flesh, the person. All right, so psychosomatic, the body-soul union. It's not divisible. Herman Bavinck, he was a theologian from many moons ago. He talked about this, that you really can't separate a person into parts, okay? A person is like an omelet. You can't unscramble an omelet. Some of you that are more scientifically minded, I've actually been told, maybe you can verify this, I've actually been told that it's actually like, from a chemistry perspective, it's impossible to unscramble an omelet, like once whatever happens. Kate, did you study that in Orgo? Yeah, not really, maybe a little. I don't know, some of you scientists can figure that out, but it's actually like impossible to unscramble an omelet. Like once it breaks and does its thing, it can't go back. And I think we need to think of humans a little bit more like that, in a holistic sort of way. We are what we are, and there is no possibility of us pulling those pieces apart. So, I don't think we should think of ourselves as bodies with a soul, all right? And this is kind of what C.S. Lewis said, which I didn't love the way he said this. He said you should think of yourself as a, he thought the second part, a soul sort of trapped in a body. You are a soul with a body. Sort of like we just have this earth suit, and once we get rid of the earth suit, then all's going to be fine and good. I don't think we should think either one of those ways. I think we should think in a holistic sort of way. We should understand ourselves as humans wonderfully, uniquely, curiously, and inexplicably made up of material and immaterial parts. All right? So we are humans, uniquely created in the image of God, which we'll, again, have to save a lot of that conversation for next week. So a digression on the soul. I know we're getting deep in the waters here. The word nephesh is a Hebrew word that's often translated soul, but it's not always translated as soul, because it can't be always translated as soul in the way that we use it. So we like the division, man is made up of a body and a soul. What we mean is material and immaterial. But the Bible's words aren't that clean, and that's part of the problem. That's what I want to show you. So Genesis 1:20, it says, let the water swarm with swarms of living souls. Nephesh is the Hebrew word. So it means more than just the immaterial part of us. That's all I'm trying to show you. Leviticus 21:11 says, he shall not go into any dead nephesh, body, soul, is how it's often translated, but not here, it can't be, nor make himself unclean, even for his father or mother. So the word nephesh, and there's, I could have pulled 50 different illustrations of this. It's not that clean of a division. And my point is this: we can't think of people like we think of a recipe, where you just kind of blend some body and soul together and you come out with a person. We are unique, and it can't be pulled apart into different parts. When it talks about God making us alive, it's the word ruach, which is spirit with a big S, wind or breath. It can be translated any of these ways. Genesis 1:2. And the ruach Elohim, spirit of God, was hovering over the face of the waters. All right, so this is the word ruach. And God made a ruach wind blow over the earth, so that's another use of that word. And the waters subsided. This is after the flood. Ecclesiastes 3. Who knows whether the ruach spirit, what animates him, makes him alive, of man goes upward, and the ruach spirit of a beast goes down into the earth. So, interesting. What is life? Life, theologically defined, is something that has ruach, God's ruach. He is what animates life. All right? So maybe I'll show you this in a verse and a drawing. All right. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their ruach, they die. So how do you die? I mean, you can die of a lot of different things, right? You can have a heart attack, you can have a stroke, you can have an accident. That's a secondary cause, though. The reason you died is God took his ruach. That's why you're not alive anymore, really, theologically defined. When you send forth your ruach, they are created. So it's opposite order, but creation, God gives the ruach, makes you alive. When he takes your ruach, that's when you die. They are created, and you renew the face of the ground. Now, the Ecclesiastes question, my artwork again, will help you here. Ecclesiastes 3:21. I just read this verse. Who knows whether the ruach of a man goes up and the ruach of the animal, I drew a horse, sort of, goes down into the ground. Who knows? Who knows how this works? I'm going to tell you, that one's bad even for me. And that's saying something. Okay, so my point in bringing all that up is we are complex beings, and we are uniquely made in the image of God. No other animal shares the status of image of God, but part of the ambiguity that I sort of intentionally created with that was to show you that we can't fully mine out and pick apart exactly what makes us unique and different, other than to say, what we'll do next week, we are created in the image of God. That's what's unique and different. Okay? So I don't think you can figure this out by DNA. There's a book I just heard about, and I was listening to an interview with this guy. He's a neuroscientist, and he's written a book, and his goal, he's a Christian, his goal is to prove the existence of the soul or immaterial part of a person through science. That's kind of what he's doing in this book, which is really interesting. I haven't read it all yet, but I'm kind of working through that. And so I don't think you can fully explain what a person is, though, other than to lean into this image of God, kind of metaphor and explanation from God. All right, pause there for just a second. I want to talk about this embodiment piece, and hopefully have some good application towards the end of this. Okay, I think a lot of us probably think in terms of our bodies are sort of a problem that has to be overcome in order to do the things that we actually want to do, right? And I think that perspective increases as we get older, and things don't function like they're supposed to, right? And things hurt, and you have limitations, and your limitations become more pronounced, and you don't have the energy you used to, and all those sorts of things. And I'm going to make an argument that that's not how we should think. It's hard not to think that way, but it's not how we should think. Greg Allison, he wrote a book called Embodied. I recommend it if you're interested in some of this stuff. God designed human beings to live fully embodied lives as the proper state of their existence. So there is a temporary separation of the body and soul or spirit coming. There's a separation coming of the material and immaterial part of us. That happens at death. God takes his ruach from the living body, and theologically speaking, that is death, the separation of the body from the immaterial. But it's temporary. It's not going to last. You will be embodied for all of eternity. Christ was embodied. He made us from the matter of the earth. Matter isn't the problem. We were created to be embodied, and that's the right thing. So Greg Allison, he gave a lecture. I found it useful, and he talks about these 4 kind of ideas. One, that we are created with bodies, as I just said. We were created gendered and sexed bodies, so we were made with specific anatomy, and that anatomy is very much tied to the person, himself or herself. Particularity, we were created with particular gifts, abilities, uniqueness, and then sociality, meaning that we were created to live independence in communities. And that leads us into this next idea I want to talk about. A few of you, I did a thing recently. I'm going to do this occasionally. I called it an occasional book club, right? An occasional book club. So if anybody wants to join the occasional book club, you can. I just set it up on Facebook, created a group, and said, whoever wants to join. And we just read a book, Kelly Kapik's book, You're Only Human. And we had a great conversation on Thursday night. We did our first one. I'll do it again if you guys want to join. Different book. I don't know what's going to be yet. In that book, Kapik talks a lot about this concept of what we call finitude, our finiteness, our limitedness, and how we need to embrace that, not run from that. This is what I think we are fighting against so much. So years ago, when technology started becoming what technology is today, which technology, by the way, technology always changes life, right? When you give a plow to a hunter-gatherer people, all of a sudden they don't wander around anymore. Why? Because they got to wait on crops to come. They got to build fences, and so technology changes the way cultures operate. Technology changes business. You could look through these great revolutions: industrial revolution, digital revolution, so on and so forth. And a lot of times, what we're trying to do is overcome this concepts of finitude, limitedness. And the computer, the personal computer, was supposed to usher in this era of you having all sorts of leisure time. That's what some people said it was going to do. Let me ask you, has that worked? Okay. Of course it didn't work. What did it do? Created more stress, more expectations, more alerts. Like that's what it does. So every time a new technology is introduced, and I think about this with AI, which we'll talk about later. I think about this with AI. It's like, it's going to make life so easy. I'm like, is it? Is it? Like our track record isn't great with how that works. So I think we need to think carefully about this concept of finitude. We can divide this into different categories. We could talk about, and I'll just kind of talk through each one of these, and then we can spend the last 5-7 minutes looking at some application of how this works out. Our finitude, our limitedness. One, in the physical way. You can only be in one place at a time, and we need to embrace that, understand that, and that's okay. Stop trying. Only God is everywhere. You have to sleep. A great exercise that I hope you'll try this. When you get tired at night and you lay down, just remember the God who watches over Jerusalem never sleeps or slumbers. God, you got watch tonight. I'm going to go to sleep now because I'm exhausted. Remind yourself of your finitude and that you're not God. There's a God and you're not him. Remind yourself of that. Sometimes when we can't sleep, it could be a good reminder of our finitude as well. And so we need to think about this. Aging. We're going to get older, and despite what wellness culture might want us to believe, and I'm all for being healthy, like eat organic, whatever, that's fine. You're not going to undo aging, all right? You might fight against it. I'm hearing more and more of this. What is aging? Well, every cell in your body actually replaces itself, and so you're a totally different you in 5 years or something. I don't know the numbers. And so, we could eventually defeat aging. I'm like, you're not going to defeat aging. What you need is what D.A. Carson said. He said, there's nothing wrong with me that a good resurrection won't fix. That's what we need. That's what we're after. And so, but we've kind of invested our hope into a techno-resurrection that's going to fix us. Stop. Stop. Be healthy. I'm not against it. But don't think you're going to reverse the physicality of yourself, of being finite. Intellectual. Accept the fact you can't know everything. None of us can. Accept the fact you can't pay attention to everything. We are under so much pressure today to know everything that's going on all around the world. It's very hard, and it's very intimidating to keep up, and just recognize you can't. I think it's healthy. Relational. Recognize your limits. You have a family, and you have your family, your friends, your church. There's limits. There's limits to all of this. There's limits on what they can do for you. There's limits on what you can do for them. And we need to accept that, and we need to lean into the fact that we were created to live in community. Nobody has all the gifts in a church, let's say. Nobody can do everything except that. Temporal. The past is the past. You can't do a thing about that. Many of us spend way too much time thinking about what happened. And we also think about the future and what's going to happen. And we make ourselves crazy because of that. And then I want to talk about this. Let's talk about growth, and then I want to talk about time. Growth is a slow process that sometimes takes a long time. And we're impatient creatures, especially in the digital tech revolution that we live in. We want everything to be microwave. Fix it now. But life is more like a crock pot. It just takes a while, for things to simmer and grow, and give yourself time to grow. Let's talk about time. Time is a limited commodity. Only Jesus gets his to-do list done. He's the only human that ever lived that got it all done in a day. And you got to remember that. But you have, the problem is not, do I have enough time? That's not really the right statement. The question is, what am I going to do with the time that God has given me? And I don't think we ought to live with this massive sense of overwhelming guilt all the time of what we did or didn't get done. I don't think God's created us to live that way. Yeah, be productive. Yeah, get yourself organized. As I joke, joke with my kids, especially when they were younger. You're like, I need a break. I'm like, from what? You have to do things to get a break. That implies that you rest, and implies that you were working. But many of us, that's not the problem. Many of us, it's you have been working and you just can't stop. You can't Sabbath. You can't trust the Lord enough to put it down and walk away. And we have to do that. We have to do that. So you're not accepting your finitude. You're not accepting your givenness. You're not accepting who God and what God has made you to be when we do that. And I know, it's hard. I know you don't understand my job, or you don't understand this and that and the other. I know, don't shoot the messenger. Just take the truth and apply it. How's it working out for you when you try to do everything for everybody all the time? You tell me if it's sustainable. All right, now you got to figure out how do I order this in such a way that's reasonable and to live in a way that honors the Lord with my responsibilities. Nobody can do everything. And I think the sooner we come to grips with that, the better off we'll be. Okay, we got 7 minutes. Conversation, thoughts, questions, any of that. Yep.
The first comment up there says, I am a body, not just a soul.
Yeah.
Scripture talks so much about us being put back into a body after,
Yeah,
the great resurrection time frame.
exactly.
Because to God, that body is important. Not just now, but eternity.
You're right. And I think maybe more properly, I probably could have said I'm a person, a body and a soul, something like that. Because, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, Ty?
I'm just, I love what you got up here, and I'm trying to overlay that with the admonition that over time that we're to be sanctified, become more like Christ, and how that overlays with this concept here.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think part of it is actually the last piece here, the growth part. I think the wisdom paradigm of decision making is so helpful to me. Here's what I mean by that. If you can look back on your life, let's say 15 years ago, and I asked you, let's say you were walking with the Lord 15 years ago, all right, so you were a believer, and just work with me there. You're trying your best to honor the Lord with the decisions you're making 15 years ago. And I said, is there anything that you would do differently 15 years ago? How many of you would say, yeah, yeah, there's definitely things I would do differently. And then I ask you, were you in sin because you made a different decision than you would make now? That's an interesting question, isn't it? And my answer to that is not necessarily. Not necessarily. Because you made the best decision you could make, honoring the Lord with the information and the data that you had at the moment. And I think that's what Jesus wants from us. Okay? Now, moving forward, you can look back and go, well, I wouldn't do it again. But I'll give you an example. And this one's maybe a little controversial. I don't know how everybody feels about this. But when Mindy and I got married, we had the Lord's Supper at our wedding. And some of you may have done that. Some of you, I don't know, is anybody planning to get married in here? I'm not trying to impose this on anybody else necessarily. We had the Lord's table. It was just the two of us. We took the supper together. A friend of mine, he was a pastor and he administered. And my thinking at the time was, I want the first thing that we do as a couple to be to take the Lord's table together. And I thought this is a beautiful picture. I have grown in my understanding of what the supper is, and I now wouldn't do that. Okay? I wouldn't do that. The reason is because I believe the supper is meant to be a corporate worship event. It's meant to be a unifying thing for the body of Christ, not two individuals that are making a sweet little commitment time at their wedding. I don't think that's what it's for. So, did I sin by doing the supper, at that event? I don't think I did. Would I do it again? No, I actually wouldn't. And I wouldn't advise others to do it. So that's an area I think thinking in terms of wisdom allows us to grow. And I put up here the law of indulation. Lewis talks about this in Screwtape Letters. And he talks about these kind of valleys, peaks and valleys that we experience in life. And I just think you have to accept that. It's not okay to be in a spiritually dry spell, forever. I'm not making a case that it's fine. I'm just saying we need to accept the reality that there's kind of peaks and valleys to our life. And that's okay. Schaeffer said, I don't believe in the second work of grace, but I think I may have experienced it. And what he means by that is I had this sort of renewal of spiritual vigor and energy that just is hard to explain. So I don't know if that helps, Ty.
No, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Think about what you were just talking about now. Sanctification. From the point I become a believer until I go home to be with the Lord, it's not a straight line.
It's not.
I wish it was, that I was always growing up, but it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the S&P, right?
Yeah.
It's depends on when you zoom in. If you zoomed in from, March to April 2020, it looks kind of bad. But if you zoom out, from 2020 to now, it looks like a totally different story. So, and there's never I don't ever want people to try to use that to say, I'm just walking in a season of sin and it's okay. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that there's a natural ebb and flow to life, and that's just how humans are created, and God's bringing us along on that process. Yep.
So, to just tag on to that, as a community of believers, we need to be transparent with each other when that's occurring, so that
Yeah.
others can encourage you and come alongside.
Amen. That's really good. Yeah, I think that's right. All right, final thoughts, questions. These are a few resources that I found helpful if you're interested. Any other final thoughts, questions, comments, cries of outrage? Okay, well, let me pray for us, and we'll call it there for the day. Lord, thanks for your grace. We thank you for the study that we can do. These are important questions. It's questions our culture is asking. It's questions we feel like we have insight and answers because of your word. Your scripture tells us that we are created fearfully and wonderfully in your image. These are amazing truths that we can use. We can use to help explain to the world around us that we see as very confused and lost. So Lord, help us to take these truths, internalize it, and be faithful as we have conversations with others. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right, next week, Image of God, we'll talk about the different views of the image of God, understanding what that is, dive into that nice and deep. Okay? See ya. Well, you're not leaving. See you in 15 minutes.